listening to the Academy Securities Geopolitical and Macro Strategy podcast, brought to you by the Academy Vets ETF, a veteran impact ETF focused on providing market-based returns while investing in mortgage-backed and asset-backed securities that support veterans. Vets, with a Z, invest in residential mortgage loans to active duty service members and veterans, as well as loans to veteran-owned small businesses. To learn more, please visit academyetfs.com or contact your broker. The Academy Vets ETF is offered by Academy Asset Management, the asset management affiliate of Academy Securities, a registered broker-dealer. This podcast was recorded on June 16, 2026. Brett Lowry is the moderator for today's episode, introducing the panel and leading the discussion.
Welcome to our latest Academy Securities Geopolitical and Macro Strategy podcast. I'm your moderator, Brett Lowry, Head of Special Situations here at Academy Securities. Today, I'm joined by General Spider Marks from our Geopolitical Intelligence Group and Peter Chur, our Head of Macro Strategy here at Academy Securities as well. On this podcast, we will cover the peace deal with Iran and what comes next in the 60-day negotiation period that will address Iran's nuclear program. I will now turn it over to General Spider Marks, our Head of Geopolitical Strategy, to set the table and kick off the discussion on next steps with Iran and where we go from here. Sir.
Thank you, Brett. Good morning, Brett. Good morning, Pete. Good to see you guys. Clearly, I think moving into this, after 108 days of conflict, epic fury, and then kind of a pause for ceasefire discussions, this interregnum between this, what I would call phase one, we're now in a phase two of a lot of diplomatic speak and clearly episodic military operations to maintain this ceasefire. I think we need to break down this MOU and understand that this is a memorandum of understanding. This is not an inked deal. And so we're right now in a position to ask a lot of questions. And I'd like to, if I can, folks, let me break this down into things I think we know, things that I think it's fair to say we do not know, and then things I would probably label certainties moving forward. So first of all, the things we think we know is that there was an agreement that the Straits of Hormuz will be opened. We simply don't know what that's going to look like, how long that's going to take. I think it's fair to assume that there will be a narrative that will fly back and forth over the course of the next many days that describes different levels of access and different capabilities that are allowed to enter and exit the Straits of Hormuz. Also, the U.S. Navy blockade, is that to be lifted? Is it to resume some shape that allows for the Navy to do routine inspections of ships that might be over the horizon, off the radar, or just routine inspections to make sure that the vessels passing through the Straits of Hormuz and out into the greater market are in fact in compliance, are registered, etc. I think that has to take place, and what other nations might participate in that. I think it's fair to also assume that current U.S. military operations will be on hold, albeit there will be no immediate reduction in terms of the size and capabilities of that force that's deployed in the Middle East, both in the Eastern Med and in the IO, Gulf of Oman, etc. That will remain very much the same, but I think we will see the rotational forces that routinely accompany these long-term deployments. One maritime group will arrive, another one will depart. So we've got another 2 months of a pretty significant military presence in that part of the world. Also, we understand there may be some type of sanctions relief. There may be some type of an investment agreement from international bodies. We simply don't know what that looks like. I think the narrative associated with that will be we broke a bunch of the leadership structure in Tehran. We altered their progress moving forward. We've delayed the development of nukes and proxies and ballistic missile development. But there is an opportunity for Iran and a necessity for Iran to rebuild. And so let's look at this as an opportunity, not just simply as punitive, albeit that's going to be a tough narrative to swing. So I think those are the things I think we know. What we do not know, I think it's fair right now, what we do not know is how will the IDF forces in Lebanon respond? Will they continue their operations? We can speculate that relationship between President Trump and Netanyahu has been somewhat testy over the course of the last couple of weeks, but I think there is an enduring relationship and a mutual respect that Israel will at some point I think, agreed to a suspension of operations, but we simply do not know that. And then the key issue moving forward, I think there are two additional key issues. One is, what is the status of the nukes? That's the period, that's the 60-day negotiation period that we're going to have. What will that look like? What will the proxy status look like? What will missile development look like? Are we going to render safe this highly enriched uranium, or are we going to take complete ownership of that? Are we going to be able to have a permissive environment where U.S. boots on the ground are going to move forward to secure, through an agreement, to secure the highly enriched uranium and to render it safe, whatever we decide to do? Will there be an international body involved in that? We simply don't know what those look like. Those are the key issues moving forward. I think the third thing that we need to address is, here's what is certain moving forward. I think the context of the DIME framework around which this engagement occurred will be almost universally negative. I think it's fair to say that the approach and the perspective is that the United States has lost its strategic focus. Now, this is what I'm describing as the potential narrative around that. We certainly can debate whether that's true or not, but I think that will be the thing that we're going to have to deal with. Have we lost our strategic focus? Has our reputation, our global reputation, been damaged such that we're going to have a significant amount of work to do moving forward? I think in terms of the military part of DIME, I think, again, military operations, the deployment package is going to remain the same. I think the IDF in Lebanon don't know what that's going to look like. And the economic perspective, certainly demurring to Peter, but I think the markets are now exuberant in terms of this MOU. How long is that sustainable? I think also you will see some dramatic conversations about replenishing our stockpiles, our ability to conduct another Epic Fury-like operation, a sustained engagement, not just through the air, but through multiple means of applying pressure. How do we address that? What are the lessons learned moving forward? And I think what we're going to have to do is we have to maintain some type of a discussion about what our military presence looks like in order to maintain a presence to apply pressure, because we have to assume with certainty that Iran will violate the terms of the agreement, whatever they look like. Back to you, Brett.
No, thank you, Spy. I really appreciate a wonderful overview of where we are, what we know, what we don't know with respect to the MOU. Now, Peter, I'll pass it to you with respect to some of the economic and macro considerations, obviously contributing a great quote in our sit rep on Sunday about, here's where we are and how the markets are responding. But any thoughts from you on kind of where we go from here, how the markets will view this, going through the signing on Friday, and where we take it from here?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the markets are just happy that this is over, right? It feels like we're heading towards some sort of extension, no risk of escalation anytime soon. So that's good enough for the markets for now. I think the president has often wanted to get investment. That was also part of Russia-Ukraine. It's been part of what he's trying to do with Venezuela. I think Venezuela was a much different case, right? We had a very cooperative government, and the people of Venezuela, and there wasn't really a regime in the same sense. I don't know how you're going to convince U.S. companies to go into Iran, given if the IRGC is still in some degree of power. So I feel that seems a little bit far-fetched and wishful thinking. And I think over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we will really start seeing what the longer-term impact has been on the oil industry from the attack so far. Right? Is LNG back to normal? Are chemical plants throughout Asia able to turn on? I think there's going to be a slower process of that going forward. I continue to look at the January 2027 contract. It's still close to $75. It was $55 before the war started. It does not seem to be coming down anytime soon. And a big part of that is we've lowered the SPR. Some of that has to get filled back up. So I think the markets may be a little bit too optimistic what's going on. The one thing that's really hard to tell, though, there is a lot of optimism in the markets about SpaceX. That's just kind of really does open a new frontier of investing. You're seeing excitement. I think SpaceX already announced they're doing a takeover of someone based on the IPO. They have that capacity. We're looking at potentially other AI IPOs. So I do think part of why markets are rallying so much isn't just the Iran deal. I think we're really excited about those, especially the SpaceX for myself. that we're seeing this opportunity for the market to expand and go forward. And again, I do think, as Spider says, we will see spending globally on defense. I think the US, we will also see kind of the nascent drone industry really emerge, whether it's 2 weeks, whether it's a few months down the road, we will see a bigger shift towards that, which I think is exciting. And we talked about this a lot. We wrote about it this weekend. I think the national security investment in space is going to be real. And we're seeing concerns around AI, what we can do with AI. But again, that's going to continue to grow. So I think the Iran deal is part of why we're happy, but only a part of it. I think there's a degree of skepticism, and I'm going to keep watching that January WTI contract to see what oil really looks like. And I'm still kind of in that we have higher inflation for longer, despite this peace agreement.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it. Spider, and we'll tackle the nuclear question here in a moment, but just pulling out a little bit with respect to how this affects the region going forward. Obviously, a lot of mistrust amongst the neighbors of Iran, following this conflict. Where do we see the relationship among some of the Gulf states going with respect to engagement with Israel moving forward, with respect to engagement with Iran and other partners? We obviously saw, UAE pull out of OPEC. I mean, things have been changing over the last few weeks, and the Middle East is not going to look the same after this conflict. I think we could probably all agree on that. But with respect to engagement from our partners and the relationships going forward in the region, what do you see as the kind of near-term effects, and obviously where do we go from there?
Yeah, I hope, Brett, really good question. I hope the Mideast does look a little bit different moving forward. We can only hope for that. And I don't think that's being Pollyannish about this. Look, the United States and Israel put some significant damage on the ability of Iran just to exercise its domestic obligations to its people. But let's be frank, how have they done that over the course of 50 years anyway? Increasingly, Iran has been isolated by its neighbors. I mean, it kind of has been for several decades, but that has been entrenched. Now, what we see after this punishing epic fury, we're going to see an effort as a part of this MOU, possibly, the desire to engage with Iran in a way that has never been in place since the beginning of this regime back in '79. Are we really going to move into an effort to try to mollify this behavior that's been in place, it's now DNA in terms of how Iran engages globally? Is that going to be modified because we're going to inject economic opportunities? We're going to try to address some legitimate concerns that Iran has moving forward, whether they acknowledge those or not. But this is a completely crushed regime that can continue to resist and has demonstrated this immense resilience. But is it ever going to migrate into being a member of the community of nations? And specifically within the Gulf region, how will those GCC nations respond to what has been a very threatening engagement and relationship with Iran that has previously been over the horizon? It's always been there. It's always been incredibly troubling, but it's never risen to the level where now the Gulf Cooperation Council states have an entirely different perspective looking outward beyond the region. It has been a safe haven for years. It is no longer that. Or are we going to be able to yo-yo back into that because of efforts coming out of this MOU? I hope the Mideast looks different. Iran is continuing to be isolated and will isolate itself. But will there be, through this economic application of power, the ability to alter what the regime looks like and how it engages? And again, there will be a long horizon in terms of that. So will there be strategic patience in order to try to adjust what Iran looks like going forward? Or are we going to have continually a punishing and punitive and very aggressive relationship with Tehran, with no indication that there's going to be some type of a modification or an adjustment to what that leadership perspective looks like? In other words, will Iran be able to alter its perspective in terms of leadership moving forward? Will the regime go away? Will it dissipate? Will it look like something different than what it's looked like over the past 50 years? We can hope for that, and we've given them a good push to move it in that direction. It's going to take some time, but I think the economic engagement will cause us to have a different perspective and hopefully different relationships moving forward. But I think it is important from the military and strategic perspective. The GCC states are going to take the lead. They don't have to take the lead, but they will take the lead in terms of what their defense posture looks like. The U.S. still will be very much a part of that.
Thank you, Spider. I mean, with respect to economic engagement, with the Iranians, as we move forward during the negotiation process in the 60 days, some sanctions could be lifted on a performance basis or a progress basis. Some assets could be unfrozen in other countries that could potentially be available to the Iranians to rebuild infrastructure, not weapons programs, not fund proxies, not, try and dig up nuclear material or continue to enrich, but rebuild the civilian infrastructure and help the people. But what other carrots does the U.S. have to move Iran through this next 60 days? I mean, they're obviously proven they're very good at stretching things out as long as they possibly can. So the 60-day time frame, is definitely optimistic. But what are your thoughts around ways that we can move Iran, continually move them through that 6-day period to get to more of a definitive nuclear agreement by using some of the economic levers as potential benefits to them to encourage them to get to where we'd like them to be?
I would suggest up front that a resumption of the application of force will not accomplish what you've just described that as the desired outcome. I think we've seen over the course of this 108 days that increasing military pressure will break a bunch of things, kill a bunch of people. It's not going to fundamentally alter the perspective and the dynamic of that leadership in Tehran. So let's not put good money after bad or good money after good money. I don't think it's going to provide the investment or the return on the investment that we want at this point. I do think the one thing that could potentially move Iran, and it has before, and we've got to bound this thing, and it's sanctions relief. If there can be an injection of cash into this regime and allows them to start the rebuild process, that's great. However, we have to expect that they're going to veer off the course the course of what this agreement looks like. And we have to anticipate their desire to have a nuclear weapon will remain inviolate. Their desire to protect themselves and to exercise power fundamentally through the use of the proxies that they've built up over the years and their incipient and growing missile defense and missile development process. We have to anticipate that. So how do we put boundaries around that? We have to be very cautious. If we neuter Iran too much, if they, as a sovereign nation, Iran is a sovereign nation, it's got the right to defend itself, but not to extend and be aggressive over the horizon, which it has fundamentally put as its strategic objective. We have to be able to realize that if we neuter it, if we crush it too much, if we don't allow certain opportunities for Iran to establish and reaffirm their sovereignty, then it's an invitation for China to come walking in. It's an invitation for Russia. It's an invitation for North Korea at this axis of upheaval to be very much a part of Tehran moving forward. If they agree to, and we insist and can verify that we have not allowed Tehran to establish some form of national security that allows them to protect themselves. This will be an invitation for those nations to very much provide, not through proxies, but they will be very much the guarantors of their security.
Yeah, and I would just add, Brett, I think on the economic side, it's really tricky, right? Because money is fungible and you can try and monitor what they spend, but to the extent they have hidden resources that they've been using, that frees up those hidden resources to do other things. I think Spider's spot on with China. China kind of continued to try and trade with them. China continued to try and provide them, and probably did provide them with some precursor elements during the war. So I feel it's going to be very difficult for us to break them away from China. I keep coming back to the fact that China actually has a trade surplus with Iran, which strikes you as weird given how much military equipment, how much energy they're buying from them. So I think that's going to be hard to break. I think what's also going to be really interesting is how do the Gulf nations that are still around convince the rest of the world that oil from them is safe? I think we are going to see U.S. oil companies. I think you're going to see Canadian oil companies aggressively move towards, hey, you should be trading with us. We are much safer to deal with. I think this is part of this whole shifting of this world order where we had this kind of globalization where everyone kind of trusted everyone to some degree. And there's going to be moving down to vertically integrated nations. I think it's going to turn out to be a huge opportunity for some of the European energy companies where their own countries start saying, hey, enough's enough. We have to make sure that we have a degree of energy dependence. So I'll be watching really closely to see what the UAE, what Dubai, what these areas can do to convince US and European companies that that is still where you want to be invested, that they are growth of the future, et cetera. Because 6 months ago, that's the pace they were on. And everything I look at is people are going to be very reluctant to build data centers unless they're hardened there. But that takes away some of their cheapness if you have to build these kind of hardened data centers. Any energy supply coming from them is probably going to have to be hardened in ways that's different than before. I think ES will kind of accept the strait is working right now, but you will see alternative paths, whether it's pipelines, et cetera. So I think there's going to have to be a lot of rebuilding and spending in the other parts. And that'll be curious to see how involved the US is, how much they do on their own, whether Europe can come in. So again, I think I don't think we ever go back to business as usual on the energy business. I think enough has changed here that countries across the globe are looking and saying, hey, we can't depend on this. It might have been different if we really did have true US investment in Iran and a true kind of regime change. It just feels like we're far away from that. And I'm unfortunately kind of in this camp, and maybe Spider is too. It feels like it's really going to be difficult not to be back in 2 or 3 years. That the second we kind of take our eyes off the ball, stuff starts to go sideways there. And now we might still be pleasantly surprised, but
Peter, I think you're spot on. I mean, that's kind of the perspective that where we are now in this operation against Tehran has not strategically altered anything other than we've got a bunch of dead guys and we've got a regime and we don't know who's in charge. And that's exactly what the Iranians want so they can sustain this negotiation period. I would anticipate we're going to go from a 60-day interregnum to it's going to be 100 days, or it's going to continue to, we're going to keep rolling this thing down because I don't know with whom we are engaging in negotiating. I think it's fair to say from the corporate perspective, corporations have forever been organized around efficiency, and that has been the strategic non-negotiable. I think we are migrating to the period where efficiency obviously is still required, but we've got to put an emphasis on resilience, which means optionality. So we're going to see that part of the world. We're not going to walk away from that part of the world, but I think there will be investment in that part of the world. And Peter, you nailed it in terms, how do you make a more resilient presence in that part of the world that allows you to enjoy the benefits of that and the rewards of that, but it's going to cost you a little more money. We're going to harden our facilities. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to have those kinds of engagements with Bahrain, with the Emirates, with Qatar, et cetera. That makes sense, and it can continue to make sense, but we're in a position where it's just going to cost us more to do that. So do you walk away with that? Or do you say, no, this can work? So this really fundamentally goes to the challenges that we've seen over the course of probably the last 5 to 6 years, which is, spheres of influence are being challenged across the board. How, in fact, do nations engage? What have we taken for granted? And now what are we going to have to do differently? And Peter, you've described that to us very well in terms of your thesis of, production for security. Nations need to be able to figure out what must we be able to guarantee and how do we do that? Well, guarantee means it's non-negotiable. Okay. Do we friend-shore it? Do we onshore it? What does that look like? Those are the key questions right now. But I do think it's more a movement toward resilience and an acknowledgement that efficiency reigns supreme, but there needs to be, we have to accord resilience its position in terms of the allocation of dollars and organizational structures.
Perfect. I just wanted to add one thing too. I think the pursuit of nuclear, I do think not only is Iran going to want a nuclear, because you just have to look at the Venn diagram of countries that we will attack and countries we won't. And there seems to be a pretty clear, view that if you have a nuclear weapon, you are much safer from attack from us or anyone else. And I think that's also going to be something Europe looks at. I think the whole world, unfortunately, is going to push towards nuclearization rather than pulling away. I hope I'm wrong on that, but it feels like a pretty logical outcome of all of this is you're better off having a nuke than not having a nuke if you are, especially if you're a troublemaker. So I
Well,
think
and that's the challenge of globalization. Globalization is that we can, number one, it's the world that we've known for the past 80 plus years. We can get along. We need to realize that we're going to make an effort to maintain those connections, economic connections, diplomatic communications, sharing scar tissue and sharing experiences. And now we're moving down the path of challenges to globalization. And you can't, the notion being the challenge to globalization means there have been, as you've described, nations that have been the superpowers. And then if at some point you extend that down the road, all of a sudden everybody's beholden to one of those superpowers, and there's a challenge to that. So the notion of globalization is being beaten about pretty aggressively right now. And it's not just this administration, but it's also the notion of other nations. If you've described, we've had a globalized connectivity. Now all of a sudden the different nations of the world say, I need to be able to meet all of those requirements of my national security. And so I'm going to start putting walls up. I'm going to start distancing myself. I'm going to increase my requirements for X, Y, and Z. That's the problem. That's the extreme of what we're talking about. I hope, certainly, we pray that that's not the case. But you're right. It's got to be addressed.
Absolutely. And we, in the last 2 minutes that we have, wanted to, effectively address that specifically, the nuclear discussion over the next 60 days. How optimistic are we that at 60 days or at 90 or 120, however long this takes, that we will get to a point where we are at least comfortable that we have a deal where we will be retrieving the highly enriched uranium. We will be observing the Iranians take apart their nuclear program, and also be open to inspections at a very aggressive pace if we think that is the best path forward, which it likely is, to ensure that they will not move beyond any kind of civilian nuclear program. Obviously big hurdles there. But Spider, some of your thoughts on, do we think, in light of everything we just talked about with respect to, nuclear, being the key deterrent, no one's attacking North Korea, this is exactly why they are pursuing this capability. But what do you think the chances are that we get to that in the near term to medium term?
The problem with nukes, we've described where we were with the JCPOA under the Obama administration. Trump 1.0 eliminated it. And are we going to see a resurrection of some of those statutes within that agreement? I think it really comes down to three things. One is, what does the infrastructure look like? The nuclear, highly enriched infrastructure, what does it look like? Does that get dismantled? And how do we verify that? So really we're in a position where we would acknowledge that needs to take place, but there are going to be elements within that will still allow, I think, Iran to be a part of the commercial nuclear business, which is an international global business. How do we do that? That's number one. So it's the infrastructure. What is the status of the infrastructure? Second thing is, do we even know what the inventory of the highly enriched uranium is? What's the denominator? We have to know with a level of certainty that this is what we are going to try to either retrieve, render safe, or achieve dilute and achieve a status where it's no longer threatening. Then the third thing is inspections. The problem with the JCPOA, fundamentally, there were several, but the problem with the JCPOA is there were no an aggressive unannounced inspection protocol that denied the ability of international agencies to come in and routinely kick the tires on the enrichment process that Iran have. That's the problem that needs to be addressed. So if those three things can be addressed, I'm optimistic we can move in that direction. The problem is, how do the Iranians feel about all that? Will they agree to this aggressive inspection program? They should. Dismantling of their program. Is it entirely dismantled, or does it still give them the ability to reach a level of enrichment that gives them commercial power? Or is it going to be completely eliminated and they're going to have to buy it off the market? That's Those are the key issues that need to be addressed, and I simply can't handicap how that's going to move forward. What I can say with a level of certainty is that at the end of 60 days, we'll be moving into another period of negotiation, which I think is exactly what the Iranians want, gives them an opportunity to address those issues and make them that much more difficult to get our arms around.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Spider. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And obviously the issue of the ballistic missile program, the issue of support to proxies, how front and center will that be in any final agreement? If we basically said the nuclear program is our number one concern, one, they will never acquire or build a nuclear weapon, and two, they will dismantle their program, and three, they'll give us back the highly enriched uranium. At least we know that's going to put them significantly behind the eight ball with respect to timing. And that's what we're obviously ultimately trying to do is, kick us out as far as we can, hopefully never, but definitely give us some additional breathing room where we know they're not going to be on an imminent breakout cycle. We're going to give them some carrots to get, towards that outcome that we would obviously like to have. But there's so many other points to consider. Obviously the situation with Hezbollah is not resolved. I mean, Netanyahu has effectively said, one, we're not a party to this deal. We obviously respect, the U.S. opinion here. We obviously acknowledge that Iran never achieving a nuclear weapons capability is the end goal of, what we're all trying to do here. But there are other things out there. One, Hezbollah will continue to be a threat. Two, even years from now, the IRGC and the Iranians will still be a threat to Israel. So, lots of things to understand with respect to, where we go from here. But Pete, I'll give you a last word on just any your final economic thoughts around, what we can expect over, the next few weeks. And then we'll wrap up from there.
I think what I'm most excited about is hopefully that this allows the president to turn his attention to the domestic market a little bit more. I do think that he delegates better maybe than he did versus Trump 1.0, but he still has to be directly involved in almost any big decision-making thing. And I feel getting the grid up to speed, getting electricity going, supporting the data centers and AI, getting the rarest and critical minerals back on track where we can be competitive with China on the processing and refining of those things has to be a focus. I think there's been an underlying current of that being worked on while the Iran war has been going on. But I do think he has been really dragged into this very personally. It takes up his time. It has pulled our attention away from other things. So I think that's what I'm looking for is back to this real shift on where's the U.S. economy headed, this production for security, and ramping that up. It's been going on in the background, but I think it's one or two notches below where it is when Trump has his direct involvement, just as everything is with this administration. And so if he can kind of get his attention back to that, I think that's what we need. That's probably what he needs coming into the midterms is just puts this off to the side, let it simmer or whatever it goes, but let's see where this develops. And again, I'm excited, I think, for the energy business. I think Europe is going to have to turn to themselves, to Canada, to the U.S. more. So there's a lot of good that can come out of this. I think our involvement in the region, we're obviously going to stay there. We're going to have to work with the Gulf states and figure out where they want us to do. But I think the real opportunity for the next few months is back to the domestic economy. I think there will be a focus, and that's what I'm looking for.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Spider, so much for your time today. Peter, always great to speak with you both. And to all the listeners, we'll keep you posted moving forward with respect to reports around the world, sit reps, and obviously, of course, in-person virtual engagement. We look forward to speaking with you again soon. And thank you so much for your support.
Thank you, everyone, for your contributions to this conversation, and thank you to our listeners as well. Academy Securities is a service-disabled, veteran-owned investment bank with a social mission to hire, mentor, and train military veterans to develop careers in finance. If you would like to engage with our geopolitical intelligence group directly, then please email us at info@academysecurities.com. I've been your host, Nicholas Carpenito, and we look forward to sharing with you again soon.